I think we're living in a time of extreme polarities. I think that things have to be pulled apart. Polarity, if you look at even studies in chaos theory, that there always has to be extreme polarities before there's a reorganization. And everything that is not consistent with a new level of energy or new level of consciousness is going to spiral apart. Every system in nature, before it evolves, goes through a period of chaos. It's just the way it is. And so information is what is causing this whole thing to accelerate, because you don't need an authority any longer to gain information. You don't need a priest or a rabbi or a teacher. You don't need a doctor to gain information. Because of technology, information is so accessible. So every time you learn knowledge, you become more conscious of the way things really are. And if you become more aware and you become more conscious, you can't have consciousness without energy. So there's an elevation globally of energy taking place. In fact, if I think back 5 years ago or 10 years ago and I walked out in front of an audience and I had to work to get an audience to a certain level of understanding, those days are over and we'll never go back to that again. Everybody is informed. So that greater level of energy, that greater level of consciousness is causing old systems and old paradigms to begin to spiral out. And so whether you're looking at the environment, politics, economics, religion, education, journalism, medicine, all of those paradigms are beginning to unravel because they're no longer consistent with a greater level of energy. So how then do we face these challenges is the big question, because if we face them in fear, then it's the very emotion and energy of fear that created them in the first place. If we face them with hostility and anger, well, we are going to be reacting and recreating the same outcome. So we have to embrace this understanding, not as in a separate way of like, you're over there and I'm over here, because that's the lie that we've been told, that separation is the way things really are. And in fact, in the quantum, everything is connected by an invisible field of energy, everything material, in fact. So then how do you unify everything material? And it's that elevated emotion called love or gratitude. So then when we begin to come from that level of consciousness, we experience less separation. In fact, our heart begins to open, our field around our body begins to expand, and that field around the body that begins to expand actually touches every other thing that's material from an immaterial place. That means then, when you're feeling love for yourself, or love for life, or love for the moment, every single person that you have a relationship with, if your signal is the strongest, will begin to affect their autonomic nervous system. We know this to be the truth because we've measured this over and over again. We can take a group of 750 people and put them in a room, and we can have 50 people in the front of the room wearing heart rate monitors. Now, it turns out, as you know the heart math team over there, Howard Martin, Roland, and Debbie, and all those guys, that when you're frustrated, when you're impatient, when you're resentful, your heart actually beats very, very incoherently. It beats out of order. That's because you're stepping on the gas and the brake at the same time. The survival systems are switching on, the stress hormones are being released, but you're not running, you're not fighting, and you're not hiding. So there's a conflict between the accelerator and the brake, and that's what causes the heart to beat arrhythmically. So then When you switch from those limited emotions to elevated emotions, then you start feeling love and gratitude. All of a sudden, you begin to produce a very coherent magnetic field around your body. That energy is frequency, and all frequency carries information. So if you have 750 people in the room, and you have 50 people in the front of the room wearing the heart rate monitor, and you teach people how to elevate their energy and to open their heart and create coherence, and then lay the thought for the greatest good of everybody sitting in the front of the room, that their lives be enriched, that their bodies be healed, that their dreams come true, that the mystical find them. When you see the majority of those people wearing the heart rate monitors all go into heart coherence at the exact same time, in the exact same day, on the exact same meditation, you have to scratch your head and realize that there is no separation. In fact, it is that energy that binds all of us. So now, how do you change the world then is the next question, because if you're seeing those non-local changes, then those people that are feeling heart coherence, every person they're in a relationship with, that they are networked with, to some measure or some degree, will have an effect on their autonomic nervous system. Well, they'll feel more coherent or more loving in that moment. So then if you get a group of people all doing this around the world, and HeartMath has done great research on Project Coherence to show that, in effect, that it can happen on opposite sides of the world, you get enough people doing that, you start seeing everybody coming from the place of love. Now, what does that do? Something emerges. A new species, a new consciousness emerges, where we're all acting as one mind. The beauty behind those birds and those fish is when you look at them, they look at like one organism. They look like a bigger organism than they really are. The individuals are making up the whole, but they're connected and they're acting as one mind. So then the antithesis is also true. The way you control people and cause them to believe that they're separate is to create the stress hormones, because when stress hormones are released, the opposite happens. You contract. The energy of field around your body is being used. The vital life force is being used and turned into chemistry, and the field around your body shrinks. Now you feel more like matter and less like energy, more like particle and less like wave. The very hormones of stress really endorse our senses, and we become materialists. So if we can't see it or smell it or hear it or taste it or feel it, it doesn't exist. And those chemicals then cause us to feel separation, because our senses fool us into believing you're over there and I'm over here. I'm over here and my dreams are way over there, and I have to drag my body through space to get to my future, and it's going to take time. So our dreams are way out away from us, and it's going to take time for us to get to them. So now, get a community of people together that are all resonating at that frequency, you start to see dramatic changes that will begin to take place in crime rates, in violence, in economic growth as a result of a new energy. Now, but here's the deal. If you measure those changes when, say, in a peace gathering project where thousands of people are focusing on peace, and you start seeing changes in crime and violence and everything else, when those peace gathering projects end, violence and crime return back to the same level again. So it's not enough to just think it. We have to live it. We have to live that prayer every single day. We have to demonstrate peace. We have to embody it. We have to do it with our eyes open. We have to demonstrate it so that we give others permission to do the same. And so then the question is, then how do you become supernatural? Well, you have to first start doing what feels unnatural. That means when everybody else is in fear, that's when you show courage. When everybody else is hostile and angry, that's the time to show love and compassion. When everybody else is in lack and poverty, that's the time to give. And I think that gives people permission to do the same, because of mirror neurons. We want to emulate that behavior, and it counts the most in those moments. It doesn't count when everything is comfortable and okay. It counts the most when you should be doing something else. And if you're able to go against those years, thousands of years of genetic programming hardwired into our survival centers, all of a sudden other people will begin to do the same, and you will see an emergence of a new consciousness. So in order for you to affect matter, you have to combine a clear intention, a coherent brain, with an elevated emotion heart-centered feeling. This is the center of oneness. This is the center of wholeness. This is where our divinity starts. This is the union of polarity, the union of opposites. This is where it all comes together. And when you get it, and when you get that energy right here, it happens, and we've measured this. Once it's here, it's going to go all the way to the brain. It's going to act as an amplifier to amplify the brain. And when the brain starts to get super coherent, then it has very direct effects on the heart. So what's the relevance behind that? Well, once again, the signal that you're creating on a daily basis is going to either work in a constructive way or in a destructive way. And as an example, if you're walking around feeling sorry for yourself and suffering and feeling victimized, then you're actually emanating that signal into the field. And what you're saying is, bring me an experience equal to my suffering, but bring it in a way that I least expect, that surprises me and leaves no doubt that I've created this outcome. So in a sense, we're not punished for our sins, we're punished by our sins. And sin is an attitude. So then the opposite is also true. When you teach people how to connect to the energy of a future dream and be defined by a vision of the future instead of the memories of the past, to believe in their future more than they believe in their past, to fall in love with their future more than they fall in love with their past, and be able to combine that clear intention of that future and begin to feel the emotions of that future before it's made manifest. They're broadcasting a whole new signature into the field. Now, the beauty behind that is that the longer you're conscious of that energy, the more you're drawing that future to you.
If oxytocin levels are up and it's the chemical that bonds, you're going to believe in that future you're creating with all of your heart, it better be opened and activated, and we're going to measure it. And I'm going to tell you, you're doing it or you're not. And so then when people start realizing it was never about that, it was about who they became, that we overcome that week. We overcome. I give people numerous opportunities to get beyond themselves, numerous opportunities to connect with themselves. I want them to get frustrated. I want them to get impatient. I want them to get overly analytical, because that's the end of their belief. And then finally, when they finally make up their mind to let go and just do it, and they run into that feeling, they run into that experience, they're all in. You think they don't want a sports car anymore. They want that, whatever that was. And if it comes with a transcendental moment, when they come back to their senses from that inner experience, their spectrum of reality is broadened. They're seeing things they had never seen before because their brain wasn't wired to see it, but it didn't come from the environment, it came from their inner environment. That transcendental moment now is producing a feeling, a frequency that is so unusual. It's so much joy, so much bliss, so much ecstasy. I've watched people have to stop it because it's way bigger than them. Now, I would consider that a good problem to have. You measure that person's immune system. You measure the changes in their heart rate variability, not a little amplitude, huge amplitudes. That person is feeling a lot of love. And imagine it's a man. Imagine a man whose heart is open that wide. They sob with the freedom to be able to not care what they look like or trying to fit into some paradigm or mold. So then a new consciousness in that footprint is emerging, and we have scientific evidence. I can tell you can make your brain work better in a week. You can make your heart more coherent. You can change the field around your body. You can strengthen your immune system. You can change your gene expression. You can lengthen your life. You can create so many oxidative changes in your cells. We have great research to prove that. That's the truth of who you are. That's the truth, that miracle within you. That evidence is the backbone that gives people permission to try it out. It's the language. Then you see someone standing on the stage telling their story in testimony, whether it's stage 4 cancer, whether it's MS, whether it's blind people seeing, deaf people hearing. You can't go back to being the same person after that. Evidence is the loudest voice. And so then when we begin to make those inroads, and the footprint exists in consciousness, and you're witnessing it in three-dimensional reality, the illusion of limitation begins to change. And now all you want to do is you crave the unknown. So people in our work don't get up in the morning and go, oh God, I I got to do my meditation today. No, they're not doing that. Their body is waking them up saying, get out of bed, because they don't want the magic to end. And when you start seeing the gap between cause and effect, thought and experience closing down, you're moving closer to the divine. And when that happens, all the things you thought you want, you no longer want, because the overcoming process leading to who you become, nobody can take that away from you. So we practice it in our seated meditations. We practice it standing and walking. You gotta walk as it, and you better be able to embody it and practice doing it with your eyes open. So when you return back to your life, when you walk from your house to your car, you're walking in the energy of your future. And if you keep doing that, it's going to become a habit. People are going to start looking at you going, something's different about you. You know why? Because you're no longer showing up equal to their memory of you. Something's different about you. You're unpredictable. It's not what you're saying any longer. It's who you are. And so that person then is off their timeline. They're not headed to that same future. And all I want to do in a week-long event is bump everybody off that timeline into a new future. Some people, huge degrees. Stage 4 cancers, tumors disappearing. You listen to that story of the person on the stage, your next meditation, you are not going to go half in. You're going to go all in. That's all I want, is I want people to go all in. I want to provide people with my greatest understanding of the truth, and then numerous opportunities to experience it, nothing more. And when the magic starts to happen, it's way bigger than me. It's beyond my control. All I want to do is provide the environment where they feel safe enough to begin to create. This is a time in history right now. 15 years ago, it was philosophy. Quantum physics. Now everybody's informed. Now people. This is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. Just to know how to do it. And if you give them that sound scientific information, I now know that if I can speak it in a way that nothing is left to conjecture, nothing is left to superstition, nothing is left to dogma. They know exactly what they're doing and why. And the moment you know the what and the why, the how starts to get easier. So I will deliver concepts, ideas, mix different forms of science to create a model of understanding. And I now know that if that person, as I develop this model of understanding, can explain that model to someone else, they're wiring it in their brain. They're installing the hardware. If they can't explain it, it's not wired in their brain, and they're not going to believe that they can do it. So if they can turn the person next to them, between the two of them, and build a model of understanding, they're making their brain fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations. They're changing their mind. Mind is the brain in action. If I keep reminding them of what they're learning, nerve cells that fire together wire together. They're installing the circuitry. Now, the next step is to provide the environment and give them the proper instruction to get their behaviors to match their intentions, to get their actions equal to their thoughts, to get their mind and body working together. If they do, they're going to run into a new experience. Now, the crazy thing about the experience is learning is making new synaptic connections. That's what learning is. Research shows that you pay attention and learn something new and you repeat it just for an hour, you're going to double the number of connections in your brain. That's a lot, 1,600 to the 3,200 connections. That's a lot of extra connections. But if you don't review it, if you don't think about it, if you don't repeat it, those circuits prune apart within hours or days. So if learning is making new connections, then remembering is maintaining and sustaining those connections, you got to review it. It's so much easier to forget than remember when it comes to this stuff, and it's a constant process. So then if they can get their behaviors to match their intentions and they have a new experience enriches the philosophical circuits in the brain, but when those neurons string into place, the brain makes a chemical. And that chemical is called a feeling or an emotion. And when you start feeling unlimited, when you start feeling worthy, when you are having an experience that causes you to be more in love with life, it is that chemical release from the limbic brain that teaches your body chemically to understand what your mind has intellectually understood. So if knowledge is for the mind, experience is for the body, and in that moment the person's embodying the truth of that philosophy, and now they're selecting and instructing new genes from the experience because the chemistry that's coming from the environment is information. And so genes make proteins, and all of a sudden they start wearing a different body. Repeat it over and over again. Do anything over and over again. Neurochemically, you'll condition your mind and body begin to work as one. Do it enough times, now your body will know better than your conscious mind. Now it's innate in you. Now it's second nature. Now it's simple. Now you know that you know. You may not know how you do it. You don't know how, but you can do it because it's subconscious now. You have to think about this. Why is it that you can give someone a sugar pill, a saline injection, or perform some false surgery or treatment, and a certain percentage of those people will accept, believe, and surrender to the thought without any analysis that they're getting the real substance or real treatment. And they begin to program their autonomic nervous system to make their own pharmacy of chemicals that matches the exact same chemical or treatment that they think they're getting. It says a few things. Number one, it's not the external substance that's doing the healing because it's inert. There's some type of innate capacity for the body to heal, and there's some correlation between the mind and the body. So that pill represents possibility for the person. And so if you think about this, when they see the pill, they're conditioned into thinking that that pill can do something good for them. So in a depression study, for example, 3 out of 4 people that are taking a placebo in a depression study get better. Now that's 75%, which means that when that person sees the pill represents hope, a possibility for them. They begin to select a new idea, a new thought, that they could be better, a possibility. It's called a clear intention. Some people will begin to become inspired, enthusiastic, excited, and when you combine that clear intention with an elevated emotion, you are changing a person's biology from living in the past to living in the future. And they begin to make their own pharmacy of antidepressants that begins to help them. Now, it's not a one-shot deal, because in those studies, for example, the person who's taking the placebo has to take that pill for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. So every day, then, they're reminding themselves of a new future reality. And that pill represents a symbol. It represents a symbol of hope, a symbol of possibility. And instead of them relating to themselves in a limited way, that they have to resign to the idea that they can't think greater than how they feel, and in the depression study, or feelings have become the means of thinking, they're actually changing their physiology by thought alone. And the redundancy and the repetition of that cycle begins to select different functions in the nervous system, and your nervous system is the best pharmacy or drug producer in the world, and begins to select new genes and instruct new genes to cause a person's biology to begin to change. And if you keep knocking on a genetic door, there's a good possibility that you can program a gene or upregulate a gene to do something well and downregulate a gene to turn off. And so my interest is in understanding how the placebo works. How does it work? Once you understand how it works, will you be able to teach it? Because do you need the sugar pill in order to move into a new state of being? Or can you teach a person to select an unknown instead of a known, and continuously select that unknown and emotionally embrace that future before the event occurs, so much so that the body, as the unconscious mind, begins to believe it's living in that future reality in the present moment. And if the person does that, just like taking the placebo for 6 weeks, alters their state of being every single day, is it possible that that unknown becomes a known, and they begin to change their physiology and biology just by thought alone? In fact, your brain is organized to reflect everything you know in your life. Your brain is a record of all the things you've learned and experienced to date. It's an artifact. And when you have an experience, when you're in the midst of an experience, All of your five senses plug you into the external environment. And as your brain is processing all of this vital sensory data, all of that information rushes back to the brain. When it reaches the brain, it causes jungles of neurons to organize themselves into networks, to string into patterns, to reflect their interaction with their external environment. The moment those neurons organize into patterns, the brain makes a chemical, and that chemical is called a feeling or an emotion. And so experiences tend to create more long-term memories because it patterns or stamps or embosses networks of neurons into very specific patterns, and then the emotional quotient helps us to remember the event. So we learn something new intellectually, we also cause networks of neurons to form. I mean, the Nobel Prize laureate Kandel in the year 2000 found that when people learn just one bit of information, they doubled the number of connections in their brain from 1,300 connections to 2,600 connections. So if they didn't review that information or repeat it, the connections pruned apart. So we know then that learning semantic information begins to organize circuitry in the brain, and experiences enrich the brain. The end product of experience, of course, is the emotion, and it causes us to feel certain ways. You can remember where you were on 9/11. You can tell me who you were with, what time of day it was, what you were doing, because whatever you were seeing in that moment or hearing in that moment changed how you were feeling. And the moment you felt altered or you felt differently, significantly, your brain perked up and you paid attention to whatever caused that. And that event in and of itself is called a memory. So then most of our thoughts and feelings tend to be within the neural circuitry of the past and the emotions of the past chemically. So if you take a thought, thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates a state of being. So if you combine a thought and a feeling, a thought and a feeling, a thought and a feeling, and you have a series of good thoughts that are connected to a series of good feelings, that cycle of thinking and feeling creates what's called an attitude. If you have a series of negative thoughts that are connected to some pretty bad feelings, you'll say I have a pretty bad attitude today. So if how you think and how you feel creates a state of being, then attitudes are just shortened states of being. You can feel good in the morning, you can feel bad in the afternoon. If you take an attitude, an attitude, an attitude, and you begin to string attitudes together, when you combine an attitude, an attitude, an attitude, you start to form what's called beliefs. Now, a belief is just a thought you keep thinking over and over again until you hardwire it in your brain. And because beliefs are based on past experiences, then the very boundaries of our beliefs are how we feel. And so when our beliefs get challenged, it typically doesn't feel right. So I know from the research that we've done that the redundancy of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking over time, for example, a person has an insecure thought, then they feel insecure. The moment they feel insecure, they think more insecure thoughts. They fire and wire more circuits in their brain to feel more chemicals of insecurity. And then once they're feeling insecure, they think more insecure thoughts, and they do this for over and over again. The redundancy and the repetition of that cycle over time conditions the body to subconsciously become the mind. Once the body becomes the mind, that's called a habit. Turns out that 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old are a set of habituations, unconscious thoughts, unconscious behaviors, unconscious emotional reactions that function like a subconscious computer program. So back to beliefs. An attitude, an attitude, an attitude are shortened states of being. And you combine them together then a belief then, the cycle of thinking, feeling over time, creates a subconscious state of being. So all beliefs are subconscious states of being. We have beliefs about God, about spirituality, about health, about relationships, about love. And all of those are based on our past experiences, but the majority of those beliefs, we don't even know that we believe them because we think they're true, because they're not functioning primarily in the conscious mind. So then, if you take a belief, a belief, a belief, and you stack them together, you start to form what's called perceptions. And perceptions have everything to do with the relationships we have, the things we create, the behaviors we demonstrate, and even the choices we make in our relationships. So then, why is that important? Because then, if beliefs are subconscious states of being, and you're stringing beliefs together, then most people are viewing their life through the lens of the past, unconsciously. And they are filling in reality. They're seeing reality. They're filling it in from their past memory. We know this to be true because they did an amazing experiment where they took a group of people and they had them wear these lenses. And the lenses were divided in half. And when they looked to one side, they saw one color. And they looked to another side, they saw another color. And they said to them, okay, well, wear these glasses every day for 2 weeks. Take your kids to school, do all the things you do at work, go shopping, work out, live your life. At the end of 2 weeks, they brought those people back into the lab and they said, look to the left, what color do you see? We don't see a color. Look to the right, what color do you see? We don't see a color. Now, it says a couple things. Number one, the eyes don't see. The brain sees. But more emphatically important is that those people were filling in their external reality based on their memory in their brain. If they were truly seeing, they would be seeing those colors, right? So then, in our perceptions then, we are overlaying our future. We're overlaying the present moment with our memory of the past. And so then, that then begins to diminish possibility. And it begins to close down the way that we can begin to navigate and function in our lives. So then, in order for us to change any belief or perception about ourselves and our lives, we have to make a decision with such firm intention that the amplitude of that decision carries a level of energy that's greater than the hardwired programs in the brain and the emotional conditioning in the body, and the body has to respond to a new mind. In other words, the choice becomes an experience that the person never forgets because the internal experience begins to reorganize the circuitry in their brain and send a new emotional signature in their body. And in that moment, the person is becoming liberated from the past. People start needing the problems in their life. And the arousal of those chemicals then narrows our focus on matter. And we focus on the particle in quantum physics, and we take away possibility. And so we started to realize that when people go from a narrow focus to an open focus, and when they begin to pay attention to that field, they stay present with it, they experience it, they become more aware of it. Moment by moment by moment, there'll come a moment where all of a sudden they'll begin to connect to it. Now, the hormones of stress create separation. There's me here and there's you there, and there's space and distance between us, and then there's me here, and then there's my future and my dreams way over there. And I got to drag my body through space to get to my dreams, and it's going to take time. And that's the world of Newtonian physics. And the more separation we have between 2 points of consciousness, the more distance we have between 2 points of consciousness, the more time it's going to take for me to get there. If I'm in Mexico City and I say I want to get to Dallas and I'm going to walk, well, I'm going to drag my body through space and it's going to take me a long time to get there. 1 point of consciousness, Mexico City, the other point of consciousness, Dallas. My body moves through space, it takes time. Well, in the quantum, it's kind of opposite, because in this three-dimensional world, there's an infinite amount of space. Space is the commodity. And we experience time moving through space. But in the quantum, there's an infinite amount of time. Time is eternal. And if time is eternal in that realm, imagine if you had all the time in the world. You can get anything done you wanted to, right?
Yes.
It's only equal to your imagination. And so then, as you as a consciousness, as you go from a somebody to a nobody, as someone to no one, from something to nothing, from somewhere to nowhere, from sometime to no time, and you become pure consciousness, as our students begin to connect to that field, and they begin to pay attention to it and surrender to it and stay present with it and go deeper into it, their consciousness is moving closer to the consciousness of the unified field. And as you begin to move closer and closer to it, the signature of the unified field is oneness and wholeness, which means you experience less separation and you experience more wholeness. And if you feel more whole, you feel like you already have everything you want. And so you're no longer creating from duality or polarity or lack. And as you get closer and closer to that unified field, there's less separation between 2 points of consciousness, then there's less time, which means it starts happening in a shorter amount of time. So we started doing these week-long events because I realized, boy, after 4 days, people are connecting and having these amazing experiences. What would happen if we had them for a week? And that's what we're starting to see now, instantaneous, miraculous changes. And that's where we're at. I believe in this concept called information, the transformation. Mm-hmm. I now know, without a doubt, Humberto, yes, if you give people sound scientific information, mm-hmm, and science is the contemporary language of mysticism. Correct. It is. Correct. The science demystifies the mystical. And you combine a little quantum physics with a little neuroscience, a little neuroendocrinology, a little psychoneuroimmunology, a little epigenetics, a little brainwave technology. And people, as they're embracing that information, and it's current. Now, it's not enough to just listen to it, because you learn it, you make new connections in your brain. But then we ask our students to turn to the person next to them and explain it. If you can't explain it, it's not wired in your brain. So then they begin to build a model of understanding, firing and wiring, firing and wiring. And as they begin to make their brain fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations, they're changing their mind. Mind is the brain in action. So if we keep reminding them of these models and they can explain it, they're installing the neurological hardware in their brain in preparation for the experience. And the more they understand what they're doing and why, the how gets easier. So then, if I can set up the conditions in the environment immediately right afterwards, and nothing's left to conjecture, nothing's left to superstition, nothing's left to dogma. Yes. You understand exactly what you're doing and why. And you give the people the proper instruction, and they feel safe enough to do it. And I have 750 people or 1,000 people or 1,500 people, a community of people all doing it at the same time. A certain percentage of those people are going to get their behaviors to match their intentions and their actions equal to their thoughts. And when they do, they're going to have some type of transformation, a change in form. Mm-hmm. Well, if I could measure their transformation, like we did, then I have more information to teach transformation the next time. And if I can measure that transformation, I have more information to teach transformation the next time. So all of a sudden you start closing the gap between knowledge and experience. So there's a momentum when you get a community of people together, and they're not busy on their cell phones or their computers or taking care of their kids. They are focused, and they're focused on creating a new future. And after looking at 8,000 some odd brain scans, I can tell you that you are at your absolute best when you get beyond yourself, period. That is a fact. So you get all of a sudden now people starting to break through. And we start at 6 in the morning, and we go to 6 in the evening or 7 in the evening. Nobody complains. It's fun. And some days we're up at 4 in the morning because that is when the brain chemistry is right for the mystical. And people show up because they want the mystical more than their sleep. Yes. So if we get a community of people doing this, and the first day, it's a little bit of a challenge to break past your emotions and your frustration and your habits and all the voices in your head. But if you keep going, all of a sudden, there's a momentum. And people just start letting go. And so in 4 days, well, Saturday or Sunday, the energy of the room was off the chart. People were standing up that had all kinds of amazing healings. And I thought, what if we had 3 more days of this? We could move mountains. What happens with most people is that I believe that you learn the most about yourself, mm-hmm, and you learn the most about others when they're outside their comfort zone. True. Or when we're outside our comfort zone. So then all of this is like to get people to the point where they believe in themselves. And when you believe in yourself, you believe in possibility. And when you take a person who says, I don't think I can do that, and you say, well, why don't you just climb up and see how you do? And then they climb up, and then you say, why don't you just get up there? And, it's all safe, and it's, there's a ton of support.
But if you're afraid of heights, it freaks you out.
But if you go further than where you normally go, there's a release of energy.
Yes.
And that release of energy is free energy. That's available energy for you to create a new future. That's available energy to heal. So in these week-longs, we've had 2 so far. I'll show you some of the videos when we break here, and it's really powerful, really powerful. And to challenge people to that measure and to get them to believe in themselves, there's no greater drug.
Yeah.
There's just no greater feeling. And then imagine, you're up there and it's not competitive. Everybody is down there cheering you on and loving you.
Yeah, you're right.
You can do this. And, people in their 80s, do that. And then when it comes to the walking meditation, they heal their body in 1 hour, walking as their future self. It's who you become in the process. Because every person that had a spontaneous remission, and I've interviewed so many of them in our work, they'll tell you that my disease was my greatest teacher. They'll tell you it wasn't my mother, it wasn't my father who was abusive, it wasn't my uncle, who was abusive. It's just who I became in the process. You can't take that away from a person, because it's not the wealth. It's you become the very thing. And so people are starting to wrap their mind around these concepts. And when you start understanding that, the only thing you want is the unknown. In stress, you run from the unknown. When your heart is open, you crave it. It's an adventure. And so people are evolving because of it, and they're doing the work. And we have the evidence to show that common people around the world are doing the uncommon.